7-Eleven closing 444 underperforming stores.
There's a sign in the window. This 7-Eleven on Ellis Avenue is closed.
On October 10, 2024, the illusion of BC's prosperity died a quiet death. It wasn't a bank crash or a stock market plunge, it was the sudden, permanent shutdown of 13 7-Elevens across Metro Vancouver, part of a staggering collapse of 444 stores continent-wide. The Burnaby Edmonds location, the Coquitlam Burke Mountain store, downtown Prince George, all gone. When the BC Premier was briefed on this retail carnage, his response was telling, but incomplete. He cited unprecedented economic challenges. But the official story, inflation squeezed low-income consumers, was a catastrophic understatement. This wasn't about the price of goods, this was about the cost of the roof over your head, and the connection is about to get terrifyingly real. 7&I Holdings, the parent company, was explicit, stating stores closed because inflation was squeezing middle and low-income consumers, leading to a relentless 7.3% plummet in foot traffic over 6 consecutive months. But here's the cold, hard truth: inflation had actually begun to moderate by late 2024. The Bank of Canada had started cutting rates. So, what was really destroying consumer spending? According to an RBC economics report that should have been front-page news, the average BC household now dedicates a soul-crushing 92.7% of their median household income to housing costs. 92.7%. Think about that number. That leaves exactly 7.3% for everything else: food, transportation, healthcare, clothing, and that simple, impulse purchase you use to grab at 7-Eleven. It leaves nothing for the Slurpee. This isn't just an economic statistic, this is the sound of household budgets cracking under the impossible pressure of an inflated housing market, and the disappearance of the 7-Eleven is the ultimate, heartbreaking casualty. The Slurpee is the metaphor for the death of disposable income in the most expensive province in Canada. We're going to follow the money from mortgage payment shock to consumer spending collapse to retail bankruptcy. We will show how this housing crisis has metastasized through the entire economy, leaving a trail of empty stores and broken dreams. This isn't just about real estate prices anymore, it's about the very social contract failing. Before we dive into the retail graveyard and the financial time bomb that's about to explode, if this video reveals something you didn't know about the economy where you live, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. We track the money and the stories that the mainstream news avoids, and you won't want to miss our next deep dive into Vancouver's looming infrastructure gap that threatens to stall 100,000 housing projects. Join the community now. The 7-Eleven closures were the scream, but the Hudson's Bay collapse was the eulogy for Canadian retail. On March 7, 2025, Hudson's Bay, an entity founded in 1670, 355 years of Canadian history, filed for creditor protection. This department store survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless recessions, but it couldn't survive the current environment of zero consumer confidence. The emotional weight of this closure is impossible to overstate. The downtown Vancouver flagship store alone carried a $22 million mortgage, and when its doors shut, it left an unfillable, gaping crater in the retail core, sending a cold shiver through every commercial landlord. This wasn't just a loss of commerce, it was the disappearance of a physical landmark, a historic gathering place, and it was a clear signal that the financial devastation was spreading far beyond convenience items. According to Retail Insider, Hudson's Bay owed suppliers like Levi's Canada over $4.3 million for merchandise that would now gather dust in a warehouse, an unpaid bill that ripples out to manufacturing jobs and supply chains. But the contagion didn't stop there. Frank and Oak announced the closure of all 14 Canadian stores. At one single mall, Metropolis at Metrotown, the Microsoft store closed, then Frank and Oak, then additional shuttered 77 stores nationwide, followed by Time Eternity, Justice, and Loft. Multiple anchor tenants vanished within 5 years. This pattern is the key. It's not just small businesses, it's the foundational pillars of Canadian retail history and the major tenants that define a shopping center's viability. The critical insight here, the one the media often misses, is that 7&I Holdings didn't blame online shopping for the 7-Eleven closures. Their earnings report was surgically precise, inflationary pressures squeezing middle and low-income consumers combined with foot traffic declining for 6 straight months. When convenience stores, which are built on impulse buys and high-volume, low-margin transactions, start hemorrhaging customers, it means something fundamental has broken in the household budget. It means there are no more spare $5 or $10 bills. The problem isn't Amazon, the problem is the $1,600 extra you're paying the bank every month. And if you own property or you're thinking about buying, this retail collapse directly threatens your investment value. Empty storefronts are a psychological and economic toxin. They kill neighborhood appeal and tank home prices by destroying the perceived value of the community. The closures are no longer a retail story, they are a real estate crisis playing out on Main Street. The single greatest threat to the Canadian economy right now isn't interest rates or inflation, it's the imminent, unavoidable mortgage renewal time bomb set to explode across millions of family budgets. To understand the brutal, life-altering math of the renewal shock, you have to look at where the average dollar is actually going. In mid-2023, Canada's financial obligations ratio, the cost of debt servicing, rent, and utilities, hit a record 22%, a 3 percentage point jump from the pandemic era that represents hundreds of billions annually being ripped from discretionary spending and redirected to mandatory housing costs. But in BC, this scenario is a crisis on steroids. We already established that RBC reported home ownership consumes 92.7% of median household income. Now combine that with the mortgage renewal wave coming due at triple the original rates, and you have created the economic conditions for a perfect storm, a financial hurricane hitting the middle class. Consider a real, gut-wrenching scenario playing out across Metro Vancouver right now. A family bought in 2021 with a 5-year fixed mortgage at 1.8%. Their monthly payment on a $600,000 mortgage was $2,500. When that renewal hits in 2026, with current rates hovering around 5.2%, their new payment will jump to approximately $4,100. That is an extra $1,600 per month, or $19,200 annually, dedicated just to housing. This is not theoretical, this is a forced, annual tax on survival. Where does that $1,600 come from? It comes directly from the budget categories labeled dining out, entertainment, children's extracurriculars, new clothing, and convenience purchases. It comes straight out of 7-11's revenue stream and Hudson's Bay's cash registers. Now, the fear is amplified by the sheer scale. This shock is about to hit an estimated 1.2 million Canadian households renewing mortgages in 2025 and 2026, approximately 85% of whom are currently locked in at rates below 2%. The mortgage renewal wave represents over $300 billion in outstanding debt facing a rate shock that has no modern precedent, according to CHMC projections. The brutal, unforgiving math is that if 92.7% of your income is going to housing, and food inflation adds another 5 to 7% to groceries, you are functionally broke before you buy anything else. The average BC household isn't cutting back on lattes, they are cutting back on everything that isn't food or shelter. BC's consumer spending growth in 2024 was a pathetic 3.1%, while a less expensive market like Saskatchewan posted 5.8%. BC, the most expensive market, showed among the weakest spending growth. This is the definition of demand destruction. When prices soar beyond market sustainability, demand doesn't just decrease, it gets annihilated. And the businesses built on those marginal, discretionary purchases disappear first. The shock isn't just about money, it's about the dignity of choice being stripped away from millions of Canadians. The financial community has a sterile term for this economic violence: demand destruction. It describes the reality where people don't buy less of an item, they stop buying it entirely because their income has been effectively reallocated by a predatory housing market. This is the final stage of the economic disease, and it is preceded by a terrifying short-term fix: the credit trap. The major banks are not sitting idly by. KBW research analysts projected that if just 5% of renewing mortgages default, Canadian banks face roughly $15 billion in bad debt. That's why major banks have quietly raised expected credit loss reserves to 0.26%, the highest since the 2008 financial crisis. They are preparing for the economic fallout, but they are not the only ones. Defaults are the worst-case scenario, but the far more common outcome is payment prioritization, which is where the real retail destruction occurs. Families facing that $1,600 monthly increase make a series of brutal, agonizing choices. Their mortgage gets paid first, because the trauma of losing your home is simply unthinkable. What gets cut immediately? Everything else. Gym memberships, streaming services, restaurant meals, new clothing, and yes, convenience store purchases. But here is the critical, human insight. It's not just that people can't afford the new payments, the expectation of higher payments changes behavior immediately. Even families not renewing until late 2025 or 2026 began aggressively cutting spending in 2023 and 2024 in psychological preparation. This fear creates a shadow effect on consumer spending, impacting businesses months or even years in advance. The Bank of Canada, in an attempt to alleviate the shock, pushed for extended amortizations, allowing homeowners to stretch a 25-year mortgage to 30 or even 35 years. This reduces the monthly pain, but it comes at a catastrophic, hidden cost. It adds tens of thousands of dollars in extra interest to the life of the loan. Every single dollar of that additional interest paid to the banks is a dollar that is permanently not spent at a local store or restaurant. The mortgage crisis is a massive, systemic wealth transfer that is draining billions from the consumer economy and redirecting it to the banking sector, permanently starving Main Street. The compounding effect on household balance sheets is what kills small businesses. According to financial analysis, the average Canadian household entering a mortgage renewal carries approximately $180,000 in total debt. When mortgage payments jump by hundreds of dollars monthly, families initially try to maintain their lifestyle by tapping credit. Credit card balances rise, lines of credit get maxed, but this is a temporary, unsustainable bridge. Within 6 to 12 months, those credit limits are reached, and the hard, painful cuts begin. Equifax data from 2024 showed credit card delinquencies rising across BC, particularly in the Metro Vancouver region where the housing costs hit hardest. This isn't just an economic crisis, it's a crisis of faith and confidence, with the Conference Board of Canada noting consumer confidence fell 32% between January and March 2025, the steepest decline in recorded history. Consumers are not worried about tariffs, they are terrified of their renewal date. While consumers struggle under the weight of debt and retailers shut down, the developers who were supposed to be solving the supply crisis are instead facing a catastrophe of their own making, creating a vicious feedback loop that amplifies both problems. The story of Thine Properties entering receivership in October 2024 is the perfect, chilling illustration of this. Their Eclipse on Brentwood project, a massive 335-unit tower, was 95% complete when construction was abruptly halted. Now it sits as a monument to frozen capital, owing lenders $190 million and accruing a mind-boggling $54,000 in interest per day. Of those 335 units, 224 were pre-sold to buyers who are now trapped in a limbo of uncertainty. This single failure is mirrored across the city. Thine's High Line in Metrotown completed but with 119 units unsold in receivership, District Northwest Surrey with 1,023 units in an $80 million mortgage default, and the Luxury Curve Vancouver, a 60-story West End tower that owed RBC $91.2 million when it failed to hit pre-sale targets. Metro Vancouver now has approximately 2,500 newly completed condos sitting unsold, an inventory double that of just 1 year prior. The entire new build market has seized up, pre-sales fell 53% from 2023, and a staggering 61% of all pre-sale projects are currently in the danger zone, failing to reach the 70% threshold required for construction financing. For a brief period in Q2 2025, only one concrete high-rise launched across the entire metro region. Here is why the developer crisis matters to the retail stores we just discussed. The collapse of the new market was triggered by the disappearance of the investor. Investor participation, the marginal buyer that made projects financially viable, plummeted from 50% during the housing frenzy of 2021 to 2023 to a mere 7% in early 2025. This rapid exit, driven by speculation taxes and declining price expectations, instantly collapsed the developer economics. When developers go bankrupt, it's not just a balance sheet issue, it is a job destroyer. Construction workers, project managers, architects, and suppliers all lose their livelihoods. RBC Economics noted BC's construction sector was a significant source of weakness throughout 2024. When over 10,000 high-salary construction workers lose their jobs, that's potentially $700 million to $1 billion in annual wages removed from the economy. Those are the same workers who shopped at 7-Eleven. When they are unemployed, they don't buy Slurpees, and the local businesses suffer another, separate wave of closures. This is the most insidious part of the feedback loop. The problem designed to solve the supply crisis, the development industry, is instead creating a massive job and retail collapse. The economic theory becomes a visceral, physical reality when you map retail vacancies against the frozen construction sites. This is where the emotional betrayal of the community becomes painfully clear. The Burnaby-Brentwood town centre area, a neighbourhood that was supposed to be the jewel of densification, is now a perfect case study in the neighbourhood death spiral. The Line Properties Eclipse Tower, 95% complete but frozen, sits in the middle of this area. Since construction halted, this specific neighbourhood has seen 7 retail closures within a 4-block radius. Why? That tower was supposed to bring 335 new households, roughly 800 to 1,000 residents, to the immediate area. Those residents would have been the essential foot traffic, the people grabbing coffee before work, picking up dinner ingredients, and making impulse buys. This anticipated foot traffic was the foundational basis for the lease negotiations that those retailers signed. They opened their doors in expectation of a residential influx that never arrived. When the tower froze, those businesses instantly lost their projected customer base before the first apartment was even occupied. The retail lease was effectively a broken promise. A similar, painful pattern emerged around the stalled West End towers. Davie Street retailers had invested heavily in renovations and staffing increases, anticipating the hundreds of affluent households the 60-story Curve Vancouver Tower was supposed to deliver. When the receivership proceedings began, those retailers were left with expanded capacity and no customers to fill it. Some subsequently closed, others desperately downsized. The economic ripple from one stalled luxury development cascades through dozens of existing small businesses. This is the untold human cost of the housing crisis, the neighborhood entrepreneur who risked their life savings on a lease agreement that was contingent on a developer's ability to secure financing. But the deepest cut of all is the reason for the closures. Remember the Prince George downtown 7-Eleven? It closed after 25 years. The initial report blamed undesirable individuals. But the former manager, Chris Vigil, stated the real reason was a huge decline in customers coming to the store. Translation: the customer base that could afford regular convenience purchases was shrinking. By 2024, the Burnaby Canada Way and Edmonds 7-Eleven, a busy store in a prime location, was also on the chopping block. The manager, Rahul Sethi, confirmed the company's diagnosis: it wasn't making a profit, not due to theft or operational issues, but simply because foot traffic with disposable income had vanished. Their convenience store is the ultimate measure of the health of the average household's spending power, and when the 7-Eleven dies, it's a fatal diagnosis for the consumer economy. The housing crisis didn't just break the economy, it created an unprecedented, paralyzing standoff that prevents the natural market correction from occurring. Real estate economists describe this as a market-clearing failure. In a functioning market, prices adjust until supply and demand reach equilibrium. If buyers can't afford units at $1,200 per square foot, the price must drop to $900 per square foot until transactions occur. But BC's market is currently broken by 4 powerful forces preventing this necessary adjustment, leading to economic paralysis. First, the developer's dilemma. Developers who purchased land at the peak of the market cannot profitably build if they have to sell units at a lower, market-clearing price. They would rather sit on the land, incur carrying costs, and wait for prices to somehow recover than realize a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar loss. Their profit margin has become the hostage of the market. Second, their homeowners' denial. Existing homeowners who bought at peak prices are equally resistant to selling at a discount, preferring to simply wait out the market, even if it takes years, to avoid the humiliation and financial penalty of an admitted loss. They are sitting on paper wealth they refuse to convert into real losses. Third, the lender's hesitation. The banks and private lenders holding their mortgages on underwater or troubled properties prefer to extend terms and delay foreclosures rather than forcing a sale. Why? Because a forced sale would instantly crystallize their losses and flood the market with cheap inventory, which would then drag down the value of all the other mortgages they hold. They are fighting to avoid a domino effect. Fourth, the political gridlock. The provincial government has layered on speculation taxes, short-term rental restrictions, and anti-flipping rules. While these are designed to cool demand, the tension is obvious: reduce investor participation and project financing becomes nearly impossible. They are trying to address affordability while simultaneously trying to prevent a housing market collapse. This creates a painful equilibrium where developers are bankrupt while thousands of approved units never break ground. Court-ordered land sales over $5 million have doubled to 22% of all transactions, and distressed sales are becoming common. The market is frozen in a state of mutual deterrence. Developers can't get financing without pre-sales, can't get pre-sales without buyer confidence, and buyers won't commit because prices might still fall. Everyone waits. Meanwhile, the ecosystem of businesses that depend on transaction velocity, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, title companies, home inspectors, contractors, furniture retailers, and appliance stores, are suffering a total revenue collapse. The housing market isn't just frozen, it's freezing everything connected to it, turning the economic engine into a block of ice. The political solutions proposed, like the $200 billion Look West economic plan, will take a decade to materialize. The $7.7 billion in new housing spending will see projects occupied in 2027 or 2028. We are trapped in a slow-motion catastrophe with no clear exit. What we've uncovered is not a series of isolated economic accidents, it's a cascading, interconnected failure across the entire BC economy, triggered by the housing crisis. This crisis didn't just make homes expensive, it made economic activity impossible. The simple, devastating math is that housing costs, consuming 92.7% of income, left nothing for discretionary retail. The mortgage renewal wave, hitting 1.2 million households, is currently draining an average of $19,200 annually from family budgets. That money isn't being redirected into a savings account, it is being destroyed as economic activity, transferred straight to the banks in the form of interest and debt servicing. The 13 Metro Vancouver 7-Elevens that closed weren't victims of Amazon or changing tastes, they were casualties of households with no disposable income left. The loss of Hudson's Bay, a retailer that survived 355 years, including the Great Depression, shows that no business is too big or too historic to survive an environment where consumers have only 7.3% of their income left after paying their landlord or their bank. The developer bankruptcies, epitomized by the 95% complete, frozen Eclipse Tower, create a deadly feedback loop. Construction jobs vanish, pulling millions more out of the consumer economy, and the empty lots where residential towers were planned mean the retail spaces that would have served neighborhoods will never exist. The 2,500 unsold new condos represent approximately $2 billion in capital frozen in inventory rather than being recycled through the economy. The most frightening realization is that the worst hasn't even hit yet. The mortgage renewal wave is still building, a $300 billion debt bomb facing payment shocks of 40 to 60%, and when the full force of that shock arrives, the retail closures we've seen will look like just the beginning of the storm. The question isn't whether BC has a crisis, everyone knows it does. The question is whether the interconnected nature of housing, consumer spending, retail viability, and developer financing can be unwound before the damage becomes permanent. Can neighborhoods recover once anchor retailers are gone? Can developers restart projects after months of accruing receivership interest? Can consumer confidence ever return when every family knows a 40% payment shock is looming? The housing crisis isn't contained to real estate. It has spread to every sector of the economy, and the final bill is still being calculated.